The Young and the Restless spoilers. The tangled romantic web between Holden Novak, Audra Cortez, Kyle Abbott, and Claire Newman had been simmering beneath the surface of Genoa City for weeks, but Thanksgiving became the moment when all their unresolved tension, hidden resentments, and complicated desires finally collided in a way none of them could escape. The holiday gathering at the Abbott mansion, golden lights, warm autumn colors, the scent of cinnamon and pecan baking in the kitchen. Should have been a peaceful celebration, yet the air vibrated with an emotional electricity that promised the opposite. Kyle had invited Claire not merely as a courtesy guest but as someone who had quietly begun to matter to him, someone who stirred a part of his heart he had spent years burying beneath disappointment, broken marriages, and an exhausting cycle of betrayal. Claire, still navigating the weight of her past and the fragile path she was carving toward redemption, accepted because she sensed sincerity in Kyle, something gentle, something hopeful, something she feared she didn't deserve. And yet Kyle, with unusual vulnerability, promised her he wasn't using Harrison as bait to draw her into his world. He looked her in the eyes and told her she mattered for reasons independent of fatherhood or loneliness. That in itself was dangerous, because Kyle rarely made such admissions unless he meant them. But the complication was that Claire wasn't a blank slate, she carried the emotional shadow of Holden Novak, a man who had left a permanent mark on her in Los Angeles. Their shared past was wrapped in secrets, chaos, and an unnamed crime so dark that even brief black-and-white flashbacks could not capture its true gravity. Holden and Claire had bonded in a way that resembled survival more than romance. Fighting side by side, fleeing from something sinister, each holding a piece of the truth that could ruin them both. What happened in Los Angeles was never about love, but in trauma's aftermath, emotions blurred, boundaries dissolved, and danger created a kind of intimacy neither had asked for. Holden understood that connection better than Claire wanted to admit, and he was determined to weaponize it while presenting himself as a vulnerable, straightforward man yearning for forgiveness and a fresh start. The audience knew better, of course. Holden's charm was never clean, it carried the residue of manipulation, of someone who understood the exact tone and timing required to make people let down their guard. Audra Cortez, meanwhile, stood at the crossroads of her own unraveling. She had insisted for months that she didn't need Kyle, didn't crave affection, didn't fear being alone, and yet every time she saw Kyle with Claire, something inside her twisted sharply enough to make it hard to breathe. Jealousy was not a feeling Audra allowed herself to acknowledge, even privately. She was a strategist, a survivor, someone who moved through life by manipulating the pieces around her rather than exposing her own. But Kyle Abbott was the one exception she had never fully controlled, and that frightened her more than she would ever say aloud. She and Holden had been circling each other as well, tangled in mutual attraction that burned brightly but never deepened into anything stable. Holden was drawn to Audra's fire, her confidence, her unapologetic ambition, but beneath that chemistry lay a profound emotional emptiness neither was willing to fill. Audra was still too fractured, too guarded, too conflicted about Kyle to let herself fall for Holden completely. And Holden, sensing the power of that emotional chaos, felt compelled to expose it, especially when he realized he could use it to get closer to Claire. Holden's decision to reveal Audra's full name, Audra Cortez, was not a moment of sincerity, nor was it the moral confession he pretended it to be. It was a tactical maneuver, delivered with precision to plant doubts in Claire's mind, to cast himself as the honest one between them, to paint Audra as the mysterious woman with secrets she refused to acknowledge. By disclosing only a sliver of the truth about their past in California, Holden positioned himself as noble, as someone carrying the burden of transparency, while in reality, he hid the darker layers of their involvement. He conveniently omitted the most damning part. That he and Claire had been entangled in something far worse than stealing money from someone connected to an underground power figure. Something criminal. Something violent. Something the audience sensed without needing explicit details. The flashbacks ended before the worst moment happened, but everyone watching understood there was blood in that memory, metaphorical or literal, the show had yet to say. Holden knew Claire was fragile. He knew she was desperate to reclaim a life she never fully had. And he weaponized that desperation with the kind of confidence that belonged only to someone who had sinned too deeply to feel guilt anymore. He wanted Claire back, wanted her as his partner, his mirror, his accomplice if necessary. And every sentence he spoke about Audra, every insinuation he made, carried a calculated intention. To make Claire doubt any woman in Kyle's orbit, especially the one who shared a complex, unspoken bond with Kyle himself. Audra had love she wasn't willing to admit, a longing she didn't know how to name, and Holden could sense the internal war brewing inside her. He saw advantage in it. Kyle and Claire, on the other hand, entered the Abbott Thanksgiving celebration with the quiet hope that the event could mark a new beginning. Or at least a moment of stillness in their emotionally crowded worlds. Kyle had grown tired of running in circles with people who wanted him only when it was convenient. Claire was different. When she looked at him, he didn't feel like a chess piece in someone else's corporate or romantic strategy. She listened, she steadied him, she reminded him he was more than the wreckage of past mistakes. But Holden's presence complicated everything. Claire still carried unresolved questions about him. About their unfinished business, their unspeakable trauma, and the invisible chain that Holden enjoyed tugging whenever Claire got too close to someone else. Audra's internal struggle, though silent, was equally powerful. She had been in denial for so long that the facade was beginning to crack. Watching Holden flirt openly with Claire made her blood simmer, not because she wanted Holden, but because his pursuit of Claire threatened to expose everything she didn't want to feel about Kyle. In front of others, Audra remained poised, confident, even cold. But privately, she felt herself unraveling, torn between her calculated persona and her genuine attachment to a man who had always been her weakness. The beauty of the storyline was its symmetry. Kyle loved Claire but had unresolved chemistry with Audra. Audra loved Kyle but was entangled with Holden. Holden wanted Claire but had used Audra. Claire was drawn to Kyle but still psychologically tethered to Holden. And the Thanksgiving table, with its polished silverware and warm candlelight, became the arena where these four hearts collided, quietly, subtly, but powerfully. Holden's act of honesty was the most dangerous element of all. He wanted Claire to see him as the trustworthy one, the one who bared his soul while Kyle hid behind propriety and Audra hid behind attitude. Yet Holden's confession had a hollow core. He didn't reveal the truth to heal, he revealed it to control. He wasn't trying to protect Claire, he was trying to possess her. And the irony was that his plan inadvertently strengthened Kyle's position. Because where Holden's transparency felt manipulative, Kyle's sincerity felt real. Kyle didn't need theatrics. He didn't need half-truths. He simply needed Claire to see him as a man choosing her for reasons rooted in affection rather than obligation. When he told her he wasn't using Harrison as leverage, Claire believed him. Because Kyle Abbott had always been honest about the things that mattered. And that was the key difference. Holden revealed secrets to gain power. Kyle revealed feelings to build trust. The tension between all four of them would not end at Thanksgiving. This was not closure, this was escalation. Holden's lies would come back to haunt him. Audra's jealousy would erupt in ways she couldn't predict. Claire's heart would fracture under the pressure of two men tethered to her past and present. Kyle's calm would inevitably break as he realized that love, true love, came with a battlefield no one warned him about. Thanksgiving wasn't a reunion. It was the opening shot of a war none of them were ready for. Kyle Abbott understood better than anyone that the struggle for Claire Newman's heart was not simply a romantic rivalry, it was a test of integrity, patience, and emotional endurance. Claire had become one of the most unexpectedly compelling figures in Genoa City. Sweet yet complicated, fragile yet resilient, innocent yet tainted by past sins that would have destroyed almost anyone else. Only in the surreal moral landscape of a soap opera could a young woman who once attempted to murder members of her biological family through twisted loyalty be forgiven so swiftly by the town around her. But Claire's redemption arc had given her something rare and irresistible. An aura of purity rebuilt from ashes, a gentleness earned through violence, a vulnerability so genuine that even seasoned hearts like Kyle Abbott's couldn't resist. Kyle wasn't just drawn to Claire, he was captivated by the contrast between her innocence and her trauma. And Holden Novak, despite his darker motives, felt the same magnetic pull. It made sense. Claire wasn't like the other women in their world, women who maneuvered, strategized, or seduced as part of their survival. Claire wanted simple truths, quiet days, stable affection, the chance to reassemble the person she had never been allowed to become. That kind of emotional transparency was intoxicating to men like Kyle and Holden, who lived their lives surrounded by manipulation and half-truths. But the love triangle they found themselves trapped in wasn't really a triangle at all, it was becoming a rectangle, one with edges sharp enough to cut anyone who stepped too close. Audra Cortez, refusing to fade into the background, was the unpredictable fourth corner. She loved Kyle in a way she refused to admit, not even inside her own mind. Every time she saw Kyle and Claire together, the jealousy that sparkled behind her polished exterior became harder to suppress. And yet, Audra's pride made her dangerous. She would not beg, she would not cry, and she certainly would not walk away quietly. Her presence complicated the emotional geometry of the situation, stretching the tension between Kyle, Claire, and Holden into something volatile, unpredictable, and deeply human. Kyle knew the work ahead of him wouldn't be simple. Claire needed reassurance, consistency, gentleness, and patience, qualities he possessed but didn't always practice. He needed to prove that he was worthy of her trust, that he wasn't pursuing her simply because she was soft and healing and new. Meanwhile, he had to endure Audra's relentless commentary and subtle sabotage. Audra wasn't cruel, she was wounded. And wounded people either withdraw or lash out. Audra chose to challenge him, teasing and undermining him with remarks that always struck a little too close to the truth. Kyle knew she wasn't just trying to win, she was trying to protect herself from the heartbreak she saw coming, the heartbreak she pretended not to care about. Everything would be simpler if Claire revealed the truth about the stolen $500,000, the false identity she carried in Los Angeles, and the full extent of what happened between her and Holden. But Claire wanted so desperately to start fresh that each piece of her past felt like a stain she could not bear to bring into the open. She wanted Kyle to love the version of herself she was becoming. Not the version she had been when fear drove her decisions, and when desperation had tied her fate to Holden Novak in ways that still echoed painfully in her memory. Claire's silence wasn't deceit, it was survival. But secrets, even those born from pain, had a way of cracking open at the worst possible moments. As the holiday season approached, Claire found herself pulled into an emotional current she could no longer control. Halloween, usually lighthearted and festive, had been overshadowed by her trip to Los Angeles with Holden, a trip filled with unresolved tension, hidden danger, and flashbacks she tried to push away. She should have been home passing out candy with friends or laughing with the children of Genoa City. Instead, she had been tangled again in Holden's orbit, trapped between her yearning for closure and her fear of confronting memories she had buried too deep. It was the kind of emotional detour that could destabilize anyone, but for Claire, who was still learning how to live a normal life, it had been particularly disorienting. Thanksgiving, however, was different. Thanksgiving offered warmth, belonging, family, and stability. Being with Kyle, with Harrison, and with the Abbott family created a sense of comfort she had never experienced before. She watched Kyle carve the turkey while Harrison tugged at his sleeve, asking questions with that innocent impatience only children have. Jack offered her a seat at the table with the kind of quiet acceptance that mattered more than words. Diane, surprisingly calm, treated Claire not as a threat but as a guest, perhaps even a potential addition to the Abbott orbit. And somewhere between the laughter, the passing of dishes, and the clinking of cutlery, Claire allowed herself to feel something she had rarely felt, peace. Then came the moment that shifted everything, the kiss. Soft, hesitant, but filled with promise. Kyle cupped her cheek with a tenderness that told her he wasn't rushing, wasn't expecting, wasn't demanding, he was simply letting her know he was all in. And Claire, trembling slightly, kissed him back. It wasn't fireworks. It wasn't cinematic passion. It was something better. It felt safe. Right. Earned. A kiss that told her she didn't need to be perfect to be loved. Kyle saw her flaws, her history, her fragility, and he chose her anyway. But Christmas loomed ahead, and with it came emotional pressure no one could escape. Holidays had a way of magnifying everything: longing, guilt, love, fear. For Claire, Christmas could become the moment she either reclaimed her future or surrendered to the ghosts of her past. She had to make a choice. Kyle represented stability, healing, family, and a life she had never imagined she could deserve. Holden represented unfinished trauma, electrifying danger, and a twisted connection built in a storm of fear and survival. Holden made her feel known in the darkest way possible, while Kyle made her feel safe in the gentlest way imaginable. The truth was simple: Kyle was Claire's first real love. Not the chaotic attachment she had with Holden, not the poisonous loyalty she had with her grandmother, but a genuine feeling built on trust, vulnerability, and mutual care. He was her first love and, if she chose him fully, her lasting love. But Holden wasn't going away. Not only because he still wanted her, but because he believed he had a claim to her, a claim forged through secrets, shared crimes, and a past that bound them together more tightly than either wanted to admit. Holden was the disruption, the unfinished chapter, the temptation of unresolved danger. He would not step aside gently or gracefully. He would push. He would provoke. He would pull every thread of Claire's guilt until it frayed. And Audra, strong, intelligent, deeply conflicted Audra, was the unexpected anchor in Holden's strategy. She cared for Kyle, hated Holden's manipulation, and feared what Claire's secrets might unleash. Audra could become Claire's unlikely ally or her fiercest rival, depending on how events unfolded. Her role as Holden's emotional sounding board made her a pivot point in the entire storyline. She might warn Claire. She might betray Kyle. She might expose Holden. Or she might protect herself above all else. As Christmas approached, everything tightened: Claire's heart, Kyle's patience, Audra's jealousy, and Holden's determination. The holidays would not bring peace. They would bring revelation. Decisions. Confessions. And the moment Claire finally chose the life she wanted, and the man she believed she could become her best self with. Because Claire Newman's story was not about choosing between two men. It was about choosing between who she had been and who she wanted to become. And that choice was coming faster than anyone realized.